We also
I know, like on the like score that they gave us at the end, like it looked weird to have someone zero and stuff like that.
Oh,
But I don't know if that ended up affecting the.
It is recording, so when you are upset.
Okay.
You just, I put the little paper on the computer because I can't show it on minutes. They told me I can't show what I do. So you just have to put, you'll have to put away the mouse.
We can just get like a full face mask so we don't know who he is.
That's what it's showing through my webcam, so I just put the face on the webcam.
Yeah,
But yeah,
they don't know who he is now.
but yeah, I was gonna say.
My voice is literally every other one of my face.
Yeah, I hear him with it now. But here, if you're ordering one of those, with your mouse.
Yeah.
So I just
Click them when you're ready.
Alright.
Okay, Stephen.
I need help with it. I have 59. Yeah, that's like I didn't believe it.
raw EA. So it's section 3. You guys please probably come closer. You don't have to be good.
That's like a mouse.
I'll sit here.
I should have taught loud enough to hear my name.
Oh yeah. You know what? I'm just gonna move over there. Like here. Okay, beginning practice now. In case this is where time step is, whatever. Okay. So during the Cold War, what was the main focus of Section 1? Because Section 2 was like, oh, domestic stuff in America. That doesn't count to like the greater picture. What was like the main focus, like area-wise, of two main superpowers during Section 1?
Propaganda.
Like geographically.
Oh. It was on the third world countries.
Well, not quite. Section 1 mainly focused on Europe. You had World War II, pretty big. And then you had Stalin taking up, Eastern Bloc countries and debates about what should happen with Berlin and stuff like that. But now, it's the 50s. And basically, at this point, we've kind of accepted the fact that the Soviet Union basically owns the Eastern Bloc. They've accepted that we have Western Europe, that kind of thing. The focus starts to shift towards Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, because we mentioned that eventually these colonial powers are going to start becoming independent. And body count. We got more bodies, they got more bodies, what's going to happen? Because you have all these new people that are in the playing field. And another thing that eventually happens that we won't get into right now because that happens like in the 70s, is that the Soviet Union and China start to divert in their interest. You'll remember that China was a major win for the Soviet Union, but eventually they just kind of become completely separate.
Yeah,
So
everyone was attacking Truman because he lost China.
yeah, but eventually that kind of turns into a thing that we use against the Soviet Union, kind of, then eventually not, but whatever. So a major step with this was Eisenhower's New Look, which was a policy basically more aggressive, step into everything. And one of those main things that helped this was the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Now we've all heard CIA from first, whatever that is, but we don't really learn what that is until later on in our educational career. And essentially what it is that it is a information gathering service that looks into other nations and intervenes in foreign affairs. And it was created in 1947 under the Truman administration, but it really started picking up steam in the Eisenhower administration. The number of covert operations had risen from 302 in 1949 to 2,812 in 1942. So quite an exponential jump. The budget had raised that much in the same period of time, like basically $80 million. Quite a lot. God knows what it is today. So, the CIA would be what some official would say, a government within a government. Now, what does that sound like that we learned in Section 2? something military focused that eventually would become its sort of own entity.
I did the
Yeah.
section 1.
MIC.
Military industrial complex. I was gonna say that.
Now, even though Eisenhower, basically was like, okay, let's ramp up stuff. When he was closing out his, farewell address, he was like, okay, maybe let's stop this before it becomes a government within a government. But then that didn't happen. So yeah, basically, it could perform knowledges without even the U.S.'s, the main U.S., understanding what it is. And a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about, we didn't even really know, public conscious-wise, until recently. Anyway, Iran, 1953. This is where we start getting into, examples of the CIA and Eisenhower's new work. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh attempted to nationalize Iran's oil industry. So Iran at this point is independent, and nationalizing it.
Ms. Wynn, please dial extension 2710. Ms. Wynn, please dial extension 2710.
Anyway, so nationalizing the oil industry basically means that they're taking it for themselves, and foreign industry or foreign powers can't, steal or affect whatever they're doing.
OPEC wasn't made yet, right?
OPEC was not made yet at this point because they started realizing, man, this is a lot harder to do. Let's just form our sort of own.
You're gonna make this slideshow?
Yes, I made the slideshow about Section 3 with the social science for the Cold War.
That's cool.
So
I
yeah.
think if you're a senior,
Yes.
I'm a junior.
That's cool.
Being so great.
Well, that's cool. I've been doing this 4 years, me and Ruth now, so we've been doing it.
What's it like being a senior, pretty much?
I don't like it.
Well, I don't know if it's
Kind of harsh.
it's not so much harsh as it is just weird and sort of boring, but also super stressful at the same time.
Yeah.
It's stressful in all the worst ways, but boring in all the worst ways as well.
Freshman year is easy.
Yeah.
Sophomore year it's slightly hard. 11th grade year is a pain in the butt. And then your senior year is gonna be a headache to kill over.
Yeah. Well, you'll deal with that eventually. Anyway.
If you don't end up blowing up your house or your car first.
Thank you. Anyway, so
That's
the
funny.
Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was what Britain had that influenced their oil. Basically, Britain could take oil, free will. And they were like, yeah, let's not do that. That's a symbol of imperial influence. Let's don't deal with that anymore. So, acting on rumors that Mossadegh was collaborating with the Soviets in 1953, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Alan Dulles, very important names, along with Eisenhower, started Operation Ajax, which basically was a coup involving propaganda and military training of rebels that ousted Mossadegh and replaced him with Pahlavi, this guy right here. And he was a dictator that, damaged America's relations with all those areas in the Middle East, and would eventually cause the Iranian Islamic Revolution, just because of all the bad stuff happening there. Everybody good?
1 second.
So basically, the idea here is that a good common theme with this is we intervene in foreign affairs where any sort of leftist or nationalistic thing is happening, and that most of the time goes bad. Not necessarily for us, but sometimes for us, and just kind of in the end.
Might be China for a second.
So, Guatemala, 1954. These guys right here are the Dulles brothers. You mentioned Alan Dole and Foster Dole. And they're interesting names. So, in 1950, Jacobo Arbenz was a leftist military officer who was elected to lead Guatemala, and he attempted to make land redistribution. Taking all poor land and giving it to the people? Huh.
It's like Robin
Yeah.
Hood.
Oh yeah, but it also comes a little bit too left. So 70% of the farmland in the country was owned by 2.5% of the citizens, and a decent amount of that land was owned by the United Fruit Companies, which is what these guys up here are. And just so happens that these guys, who had major political power in the United States, had stakes in this. So they were like, oh, I want to make banana money, but I can't take over a country. Wait, let's say that they're communists so that we can do it. And then Eisenhower and them did Operation PB Success. If you see a long thing with a lot of bold numbers as an answer choice, just assume that's that. But Arbenz was forced to flee in June of 1954. And Arbenz didn't have much connection to the Soviets or communists at all, but Eisenhower saw it as a success. And ironically, the overthrow would actually trigger real communist movements in the future, specifically Cuba. So that's quite annoying.
What does the PB stand for? Something bananas?
Maybe. I don't know what the PB stands for specifically, but a fun fact about these guys. Bananas, United Fruit Company, guess what they are now? Chiquita Banana. That's right. And funny thing, what's Chiquita Banana's rival now? It's Dole Food Company. Dole Brothers. That's just a word play. But yeah, so if you ever look at Chiquita Banana, basically Mussolini. But yeah. Anyway, Vietnam, 1954. Vietnam has a long history of occupation, from ancient Chinese to the French colonizers, and eventually Japan during World War II, they occupied that nation. Japan's surrender in 1945 brought Ho Chi Minh, the communist authority, to push for freedom in a Declaration of Independence. And he directly quoted the Declaration of Independence that we have, except we didn't much like that, because, oh no, it's kind of communist. And Woodrow Wilson actually did the same thing. Like, he was like, yeah, let's not have them be independent because they're Vietnamese and Nepal and whatnot. And French colonization was kind of cool. So a little bit about Ho Chi Minh was that he was a communist. He belonged to the Communist Party, and he studied at Moscow's Communist University for the Toilers of the East. Josh, tell me what, like, the Toilers of the East would be. Like, what is a toiler? What is someone who toils,
Think of, the word kill. It's kind of like a farming word.
Yeah. And farmers, what are farmers? Like, they're
What class are they?
Yeah, what class are they? Yeah, lower working class members. And toilers, like, sometimes you can also be like, oh, you're like a troublesome thing, like you're working really hard, and then of the East.
Like that song from Harry Potter.
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know Harry Potter, but East, Asia, that kind of thing. Anyway, so the French and the Soviet Union, the U.S. backed the French in a short little war that the French and the Vietnamese had, and the Soviet Union and China backed the Viet Minh, which were the Viet Cong fighters at the time. Hold on just 1 second. Okay. But the French, being French, had to soon surrender, and they surrendered at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. That's how you speak. And the U.S. at that point had been paying 80% of the war's cost. So, wow, that's foreshadowing.
And this is kind of what started people wanting us to stay out of other countries' business. Like all the protests, like where people had signs that said "Make love, not war."
Yeah.
This is kind of the era that started it all because we lost so much money.
This is a precursor to that.
Yeah.
You really don't start seeing people protesting war, and specifically Vietnam, until the 1960s, and we'll get into that later. But this is definitely the first domino. Haha, funny, because we're going to talk about domino theory, which is unrelated. Anyway, so this is a further elaboration. Peace negotiations set in the Geneva Accords set a temporary partisan right here at the 17th parallel, which would set up two governments in the south and the north. North would be led by Ho Chi Minh, and the south would be led by Diem. And there were supposed to be elections to decide the government's fate, like whether it be communist, democratic, whatever. Those didn't happen, and yeah, we started secretly funneling money into the DN government. However, we kind of regret that later with this crazy correlation.
Wait, can you go back?
Oh,
I just want to write down this.
You don't like me if I'm sure about that or not. I was like,
yeah.
I don't know anymore.
DM, crazy Christian guy who eventually gets shot and killed, and Ho Chi Minh, old communist. Ho Chi Minh Trail, nothing. Okay, so the Ban Dung Conference in 1955. In April of 1955, delegates
Cassidy Curtis, please report to the front office. Cassidy Curtis, please report to the front office.
You know, I've been in the front office when they do that, and she doesn't sound nearly as annoying when she's doing it, but I guess there's just something about the intercom that makes the noise so much more annoying.
Because it interrupts class.
Well, that's true, but it's like her voice is way more monotone and like disgusting on the intercom. Anyway, delegates from 28 nations in Asia and Africa came together in Indonesia, in this city, which is why it's called that. And many, such as, those guys, not bolded, not important. Anyway, so they call for a non-alignment policy. What is it when you align with something?
You don't make any treaties with someone.
Yeah.
Or
like,
alliances.
yeah. If you align with something, that means like, oh, this is the way. Like I like this way of being, or I like this way of things, so I'm going to favor this or be like this. So they didn't want to do that. They weren't going to align with the Americans or the Soviets. However, you see 28 nations from Asia and Africa. Let's go right to left. You see Ethiopia, African country. All right, not too much, not too much. Egypt, not too much. Nothing to worry about. Oh no. What's the problem with China being a part of this? What is China at this point? That's a big uh-oh. There's no Western countries in this, but there's a communist country with a lot of influence in this. We were worried that they weren't really going to be a non-alignment. They were just going to. John Foster Dole said, John Foster Dole said, and who's John Foster Dole's?
One of the brothers. He was the Secretary of State. Yeah.
He was Secretary of State at United Fruit Company, that kind of thing. And he said the world ratio would go from 2 to 1 in favor of freedom, which is a very biased way of saying Western and communist, to a 1 to 3 against freedom. And basically what that means is that if the fate of every single third world country fell into the communist hands, then we would be fighting a losing battle between them. But they would be fighting a losing battle if we were able to get them. So, see that difference. Anyway, the Suez Crisis. After the Bandung Conference, Gamal Nasser, leader of Egypt's military government, looked towards further independence. And he wanted to play the two superpowers against one another. I believe he attended that. In fact, he was probably this guy right here, is Egypt. But he was going to do non-alignment, but in a different way. He was going to use the superpowers, but he wasn't going to align with either of them. He was going to actually, play them against each other. So he sought economic aid from the Americans to build things like this Aswan Dam, and he sought arms and goods from the Soviets. Seeing this, America pulled out a foreign aid talk. And to reel them back into possible talk, he nationalized the Suez Canal, which is what this is. Unfortunately, he did it on this day. Unfortunately, Britain and France didn't really like that. And seeing their new buddy old white Jews in Israel, they were like, hey, if you come together, let's ruin their whole thing. So Britain, France, and Israel they ganged together, not banged together. That's wrong. They ganged up together in October, and against Eisenhower's will and advice, they launched an attack on Egypt without American knowledge. British Prime Minister Anthony Eden attempted to hide the attack, at least at first. And the Suez Crisis, as it was come to known, was both condemned by Moscow and Washington. And essentially, it was like, hey, Americans dominate the Western Hemisphere.
I was going to say, but especially when it's American dominance, you could see this almost as a last gasp because the Suez Canal, it was especially important to Britain. I realized for the longest time Egypt was under control of Britain. The Suez Canal was Britain's means to access their colonies such as India and the rest of their stuff in Asia.
It's a vital trade route, basically.
It was
And
it's their rights. Yeah, because of Egypt saying, it's ours.
Yeah, but then the British didn't like them and they did this. But basically, the British and the French couldn't really do things like this anymore. They lost their power on the world stage. And if we don't like it, then no. Can't do it. So that basically was like the last sort of thing that Britain tried to do on its own accord in a major world thing, and it failed. So that was the death of sort of British dominance, or French dominance, or whatever. So Eisenhower pushed France and Britain to pull out of their troops and in place a UN peacekeeping force to sort of demilitarize everything. And the U.S.'s cleaning work, this is something else that also, U.S. dominance, they cleaned up the mess in less than a month. So, yeah, U.S. is pretty effective. In 1947, following the Suez Canal incident, the president announced the Eisenhower Doctrine, which is sort of like a copyright of the Truman Doctrine, if you really think about it, because it's just that, but specifically tailored to the Middle East. So essentially, if something happens in the Middle East that threatens democracy or whatever, we'll come. Except, really, we're the ones threatening democracy in the Middle East later on. But whatever. We want. Anyway, in 1958, American troops landed in Lebanon. That's an example of this coming into play. And the U.S. started to form a stronger bond with Jews in Israel, as opposed to the Soviets who built ties with the Arab nations until Afghanistan happened. But that's in Section 4.
And that kind of ties into now because a lot of people support Israel, and even though they've committed a lot of horrible crimes against
Arab people.
Yeah,
nations
and especially, it's not Pakistan. The one that they took land out of for Israel. Why can't it be?
Saudi Arabia?
No. It's,
Palestine?
yeah, Palestine. Because the Soviets supported Palestine. And so America was like, grr, anyone that supports the Soviets is obviously
And plus,
communist.
more Western interests with Jews and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Definitely, but both sides now, they have their own, pros and cons and stuff like that. But you definitely see a favoring towards Israel after this point. So, yeah. Anyway, now we move on to the Soviets, the good old buddy pals. If you thought the USA was bad, oh boy. So, on February 25th, 1956, Nikita Khrushchev, in a closed session of the 20th Party Congress, gave an address where he denounced Stalin. And this was a crazy thing. Stalin, for 30 years, had ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist, and everything that he said was go. People couldn't question him. People, God forbid, couldn't denounce them. But the next leader of the Soviet Union did denounce him. And this was known as the secret speech, and he mentioned the ruthless executions and torture faced by many, Joseph Stalin, that whole period of time. And he destroyed the godlike image of him promoted by Soviet propaganda. And in a way, it kind of did shift any blame that Khrushchev had, because to be fair, he was under Stalin. He did play a political role, but it did shift the blame off him, kind of. So, subsequent reforms under the term de-Stalinization intended to bring back, good reforms, good image. for the Kremlin. And by the way, we're going to use that word. Basically, it just means Soviet leader. So yeah. It's like chief in the United States, basically. And like opening Pandora's box, it opened wider interrogation of Stalinism throughout the Soviet sphere of influence. And that was good when he, when he liked it, but we're going to see that when he doesn't like it. So, news of the secret speech spread quickly through the Eastern Bloc. The top official of the Communist Party in Poland ironically died after reading a transcript of a heart attack, I believe, and several Stalinists were expelled from Poland and other areas as well. Protests led to restoration of an exile. I'm not going to say that. Anyway, Gomulka.
Vladislav?
Yeah, that's probably better than I can say that. So he prevented Soviet intervention. This is Poland, this side. He prevented Soviet intervention by convincing Khrushchev he didn't have any plans to challenge the order. He was just like, oh, not Stalin. So this is what Khrushchev kind of wanted. On the other side, you have Hungary. In October, protests occurred in neighboring Hungary. And this guy right here is Imre Nagy. And basically, he was an exile who was put back into power as prime minister, and he pledged dramatic freedoms. He called for Soviet troops to be withdrawn. He pledged for multi-party rule. And eventually, he would even say that he wanted to be neutral, and he wanted to be out of the Warsaw Pact. So essentially, he wouldn't be part of the Eastern Bloc. Khrushchev didn't like it. So on November 4th, keep in mind, this is basically following with the Suez Canal crisis. And there are two reasons we didn't do anything about this. Let me explain it first. November 4th, Soviets attacked the capital of Budapest in Hungary, and a bunch of people died, including Nagy, who was executed, and a bunch of people fled to Germany. So, there are two main reasons we didn't intervene. One, Eastern Bloc is kind of Soviets. We, at this point, kind of dealt with that, and there's not really much we can do. And another reason is because right at this time, we were dealing with the Suez Canal crisis, and that was our oopsie, Western oopsie, so we can't deal with their oopsie. So, yeah. That's that section. Anyway, he's the best picture ever, basically. So Khrushchev's core diplomacy, this is why he's my favorite, because this exists. Anyway, 1955, Soviet agronomists, basically dirt doctor, basically plant scientists, toured Iowa and met Roswell Garst, who's this guy right here, this Mel Brooks looking guy right here. And he was an enterprising farmer. He outlined the benefits of his drought-resistant corn, and he later met with Khrushchev that fall in the Soviet Union, and he got him to purchase 5,000 tons of kernels. Khrushchev went kind of crazy for corn, and Khrushchev's dreams for agricultural growth went far, even to the frozen tundra of Siberia, and in Ryazan, quotas were set to raise corn and meat production. Unfortunately, when you're in frozen areas like Siberia and Ryazan, you really can't do that, and desperate officials attempted to smuggle cattle in and make taxes payable on meat. But when the quota in this specific area only reached 1/6, the party boss overseeing this actually shot himself, for real. He killed himself because he couldn't make meat. Man, crazy. Anyway, Khrushchev's Virgin Lands campaign, which is wheat specifically, similarly failed. 2 million Soviets moved to the remote eastern lands in Asia and eastern Russia, and their efforts in trying to boost wheat production actually led to significant environmental damage. So not great, but hey, at least we got this image. Kind of makes sense. So I guess the main takeaway from this is that Khrushchev tried to sort of rival our agricultural output a little bit, but it's Russia, so it's kind of difficult to do that.
It's interesting. I was actually listening to a video. There's a YouTuber called, he calls his channel Tik, Tik, And he specializes in studying particularly the Eastern Front during World War II. But one of the questions he got asked was the Russian economy, was it any better? Because there were some studies that suggested that the Russian economy and the Russian peasants, their overall socioeconomic level was not much different than what it was pre-World War II. And there's a wonder about that. And you also got to think, we mentioned it earlier in the presentation, the sheer amount of casualties that the Soviet Union and Russia suffered, that even today there is still a greater number of women than there are men, so they are still feeling the effects of it. And you have to wonder, well, has it had any effect in this case in terms of their ability to produce food for the population?
Yeah. Not the best place to grow corn. Unfortunately, you didn't realize that. Anyways, so tensions rise and fall. This is the more political side of the city. Khrushchev was very boastful and aggressive after the launch of Sputnik 1. We were like, oh no, space race is now a thing, and the Soviets are ahead of us, and they did something we haven't yet. So he was like, they see that I'm better in this area. Why don't I just say I'm better in every area? So that's essentially what he did. On November 10th, 1958, he issued the West to give up West Berlin and demilitarize the area, partly to stop the flood of East Berliners to the west. And he bluffed that the Soviets had a much greater weapon system than they really did. And we'll see that, they really didn't with U-2 planes. We'll get into that in a little bit. Eisenhower held firm, though, and didn't really want to negotiate. But that didn't stop President Nixon to travel to Moscow and open up an art exhibit. Why wouldn't he? In 1959. So, Khrushchev agreed to visit the exhibit in sort of a thawing of tensions. And it was filled with TVs and Pepsi Cola and a bunch of other things. And this covers up the word July. Dang it. Okay, so
pop art coming up again.
definitely. And then specifically, you just see a lot of cultural staples like dishwashers and stuff like that and consumer items. So July 24th, the ensuing discussion between the two, known as the kitchen debate, which is Nixon right here, Khrushchev right here, and his little hat, or little cute crumble. And the kitchen debate saw the figures compare the benefits of both economic systems, and again, that covers up that. Nixon even pointed to the debate itself as a free exchange of ideas. He was like, I'm going to get really philosophical with all this. Freedom, good. And he was like, oh, basic needs being met, good. And then they just, And even though it was a debate and it was confrontation, it was a thaw in relations temporarily.
This guy said, two leaders said, hey, we're getting on the same stage. They were after talking to each other and said, well, you have your AK-47. Well, I have my Eugene Stoner's new AR-15 2016. Should we know the first models are relatively a little bit unreliable.
But
I think I saw something about when Nixon went to Moscow that he tried to say something in German, but then he ended up saying that he wanted to have sex with her because he misspoke.
I really hope that's true, but somehow I don't think it's true.
I don't know.
But this is unrelated because it doesn't talk about the Ein Berliner speech. I don't know why it doesn't. But there's like there's a theory that isn't really a theory because it's not true. That Ich bin ein Berliner means I'm a jelly donut in German. And that was a speech that JFK gave in 1963 when the Berlin Wall was built.
Yeah.
It does correctly translate. I know for a fact it translates in that area to I'm a Berliner, but I think it means everywhere in Germany I'm a Berliner. But for some reason people just got that idea that it means I'm a jelly donut. So that's but that's not in the guide, so just food for thought, I guess. Anyway, here's another great image of Khrushchev. There's just so many. Here's him, Blissy Goblin, eating a hot dog like crazy, and Eisenhower and Khrushchev. So the talk of materialist consumerism and Soviet dialectical materialism, basically your needs are being met by the state, provided some alleviation, especially since Khrushchev announced that he would tour the U.S. in September. He enjoyed the red carpet treatment given to him, and he tried to go to Disneyland, but the Soviet officials around him wouldn't let him, and he got mad. But whatever. And despite some talks with Eisenhower at Camp David, which is like a retreat for presidents, right here with Eisenhower, and the possibility of meeting again in Paris, in this area, it did little diplomatic advances. It was mainly a symbolic win. And yeah, that falls basically immediately. Another great image of Khrushchev. God, if there's one thing he can do right, it's make an entrance. All right, so on May 1st, 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down by the Soviets, putting an end to the good faith and good plans between the nations. As part of an aerial spy mission set up by Eisenhower in like 1957, U-2 spy planes which could avoid radar because they were so high up, took photographs of Soviet missile sites. And we found out they only had 6 operational like intercontinental ballistic sites.
Yeah, ballistic missiles. So how these missiles basically work is, unlike a ballistic missile, these missiles would already launch into space, and then I think it's through like a matter of calculus, their warheads are able to fall on a certain trajectory. So these, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, they can hit you.
Yeah, but they only had 6. They only had 6 things that could even do that. We definitely had a lot more at that point. So they lagged behind. All of Khrushchev's talks about, oh, we could bomb anywhere on the earth. Only 6 times. We could do it like 20 times. But Gary Powers, this guy up here, was a pilot who had miraculously survived the crash, which is amazing. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But he publicly apologized, and he admitted to the fact that it was espionage, and he was imprisoned for 2 years, and later traded for the Soviet imprisonment that we had. Eisenhower tried to cover it up as meteorological research, and the fact that Gary Powers was a rat who basically, said, oh, Eisenhower's lying, damaged his administration, and kind of made him a lame duck president at that point. And Khrushchev became even more confrontational. This is a thing at a UN meeting in October where some guy questioned the Soviet Union. I believe it was a Philippine delegate, and he got crazy. I don't know if he slammed. I know he waved to shoot definitely.
I could be wrong. He literally like this thing was saying, "We will bury you."
Yeah, he did do that. Because I searched up like Khrushchev banging shoe, and like there's things that said, oh, he didn't bang a shoe, oh, he did bang a shoe. The things that say he didn't had like Soviet in them, so I don't know if that was a reliable
You could
source.
argue he was creating memes for mainstream things.
It's true, he's the best though. But this guy right here, this is again just a tangent, but Gary Powers survived like thousands of feet in the air, right?
Did he have a parachute?
No.
I was going to say the U-2. So put in perspective, like your average airliner, I think flies at probably 25 to 40,000 feet in the air. Like U-2 flies so high, like I think they say it's 70, 80, 90,000 feet in the air. You can literally see the curvature of the earth.
He survived that crash, and then in 1977, I think he died in a helicopter crash that was like not even like 1,000 feet in the air. And he wasn't shot down. He was shot down in this one, but he just crashed and then he died in a helicopter.
You see the helmet he's having to wear because they're flying so high that he has to have oxygen.
Yeah, because like G-force and oxygen and all that stuff. But yeah. Anyway, this guy like here, I wanted to put Fahrenheit JFK, but then I thought that would be too much of a whiplash in tone, so I decided to just put normal JFK. With the Cold War tensions high and the election at a foot, a Massachusetts senator named John F. Kennedy, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, took his chance to criticize the administration of the Eisenhower and whatnot, and specifically Vice President Nixon, because that's who he was going up against. JFK narrowly beat the Vice President to become the youngest and only Catholic president in history. Now, I do want to note, if Joe Biden becomes president, then that will no longer be a only Catholic president.
I think it's funny that when Amy Coney Barrett was like the talks of her being put on the Supreme Court started, a lot of Republicans were like, Democrats are attacking her because she's Catholic, but Joe Biden's not.
Yeah, and that's what they did during this one.
Mind you, there is a sad history of people getting attacked under because of Catholic,
Yeah.
which is kind of terrible.
To think the fact that you believe in a different invisible man, not even a
Well,
different invisible man,
That's
but
why
It's the same thing.
it's the same one except
A little
you
different.
think a guy in a robe is important, and you think a guy in a robe isn't important. So you don't get to be president ever. Weird thing.
But it is a common thing.
Anyway, his administration faced immediate problems when Khrushchev brought his Berlin ultimatum. Remember when he was like, "Oh, demilitarize West Berlin and basically hand it over to us," back in Vienna in June of 1961. But Kennedy was like, "Man, I'm not backing down. I'm going to ask for $3.2 billion in defense spending from Congress." But the situation took a strange turn when the Soviets began construction on a wall, the Berlin Wall, to separate East and West Berlin. And it became a major hot topic for multiple decades. So yeah, that's that. Anyway, Cuban Revolution. Going back to the Eisenhower administration for a little bit, or actually before the 20th century technically. Since the nation's independence in 1898, Cuba had close ties with the U.S. You have this guy, Batista, who ruled the island dictatorship and was supported by the United States government. However, in January 1st, 1959, a young exile rebel who came back named Fidel Castro led a guerrilla fighting force, which basically just means an untrained army, from the Sierra Maestra Mountains all the way to the capital, which led to the Batista regime falling. And since Fidel Castro was a communist as well as an anti-imperialist, the Soviet Union was overjoyed at the coup. In fact, you can think about this, like, how did the Soviets, begin their whole thing? They were like, oh, here's
Or against the what?
against a authoritarian regime in a lot of ways.
Imperialist regime of the Romanov dynasty. And in here, or so, Cuba, yes, they were ruled by this dictator. Before that, was ruled by Spain. This dictator would come to power after the Spanish. Well, this dictatorship of this new government came to power after the Spanish-American War.
Yeah. But
for the better part of their history, over the past 2 centuries, they've been ruled by another country.
similar thing to Vietnam, actually. But
yeah,
it's very similar to Bolshevik Revolution. One former Bolshevik was like, "Oh, we felt like boys again," because it's like, "Oh, we felt just like how we used to." And Eisenhower wasn't really that impressed, and he severed diplomatic ties in January.
you don't even sever diplomatic ties. The only other step beyond that is you're declaring war on somebody.
And then that kind of happened, not officially, but it kind of happened.
Yeah.
And then the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, this is under the Kennedy administration. However, there were talks during the Eisenhower administration. We got to do this. Oh, wait, you're old and some young guy is now in office. All right, let's go talk to him. The CIA briefed him on the plan to overthrow Fidel Castro's government. The Bay of Pigs invasion, given the flattering name, definitely went well. Was executed on April 17th when a group of Cuban exiles landed on Cuba's coast. The men were supposed to get fellow citizens to also attack the government. Like Fidel Castro kind of did that. He was an exile who came and then got a bunch of people together. But in less than 24 hours, Castro's military took care of the clumsy effort. And 140 died, and basically the rest of the men were taken prisoner. And it was a major source of humiliation for the Kennedy administration. You have all these exiles, and I believe there were some American people.
Yeah, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and because and that's a major source of humiliation for the JFK, not just for JFK, but also you got to think for the CIA and its Joint Chiefs. So the Joint Chiefs being like the heads of the branches of the military, the Air Force, Navy, Army. And what's going to happen is in our next slide, if I'm correct, or so, yeah, their humiliation, you're going to see it come to play. I'd argue if you want to see it, it does a fairly good job at playing out all the politics and stuff going into the Cuban Missile Crisis and the movie things.
Definitely.
Wait, so it was American soldiers?
It was a mixture of some American soldiers, and then it was mainly Cuban exiles. Because you know that whole thing where they're like, "Oh, we'll send a few and fight." That's what they did. Kind of the Vietnam War in the beginning, and then once they started to pull out, they were like, "You guys do most of the fighting, but we'll be here, and then we'll be Saigon." But
And
this case, if you remember what we were talking about, the establishment of the CIA, the government and the government. So the CIA, almost very similar to the Russian state. They're basically, they operate in the shadows, besides gathering intelligence. In this case, trying to help the government support things that they feel that would be in support
They have
of
intelligence
U.S. society.
very
I think it's like these exiles, you won't see U.S. troops, not uniformed. However, you're gonna guess where they're getting their weapons and stuff from.
Yeah.
From us.
And they're funny folks with crosses. Wow, they didn't even think it was going to go well. They already painted a skull on it. Anyway, here's all of them being taken prisoner. You see a couple scrawny white guys in military uniforms. Those are probably the Americans, and everybody else is actually cool. Anyway, so Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuba's plea for arms and assistance was delivered by Khrushchev, who agreed to send nuclear missiles. Because go big or go home, I guess. The U.S. already had missiles in Turkey, so it seemed fairly reasonable to just kind of match what they had. The construction began in the summer of 1962, and on October 14th of 1962, U-2 planes, saying that some images of the Intercontinental ballistic missiles in the Soviet Union, images of nearly completed ballistic missile sites, 16 to 20 or 32 missiles. And these missiles had the ability to reach from Houston all the way to Baltimore. So, like, if you drew a map out, basically, like, the entire eastern coast was, like, susceptible to being nuked.
And I think later it's like even longer range missiles get placed in, which I think this can reach almost every part of the continental U.S. But I think it's like
If they definitely continued to do that, it would have been even a bigger threat. But unfortunately, seeing this, Kennedy was like, but some advisors were like, just bomb them. But then Kennedy was like, hey, I don't want to bomb them. Let's just do a naval blockade, even though that sort of led into firing on Soviets a little bit, which is an act of war. But
what they're hitting the problem is one of the big things that goes on between this nuclear terms between the United States and Soviet Union is this idea of mutually assured destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you want your nukes, we're launching ours. The problem is I put with that is that means you're literally going all in.
Yeah.
And the problem is when you go all in, well, everybody dies. Well, maybe you don't want everybody to die. So you're here trying to debate, okay, well, what can we do that's going to get our message across that's not going to lead to us nuking each other?
It's like climbing this ladder of like, okay, we can do this, and I kind of want to go further, but if you reach this threshold, it's too late.
Yeah.
You know?
The interesting thing right here, the U.S. already had missiles in Turkey. Why is it a threat? Well, because the missiles represent all of a sudden that we are going for what we call a first strike capability, meaning basically by putting missiles in Turkey, that is not a defensive stance, it's an offensive one, or so. And so you can argue that also perhaps besides Khrushchev wanting to, of course, help out Fidel Castro and them, it's like, hey, I want to balance the table. So if you're going to have nukes pointed at us, Turkey is not far from Russia, we're going to have missiles pointed at you.
So he addressed that he was doing a naval blockade, Kennedy did, and it was watched by like 1/3 of the country, basically, 96 million Americans. And his brother and the Attorney General at the time, Robert F. Kennedy, who faced a similar fate, combed through like Khrushchev's letters to craft a settlement and end the conflict. And on October 28th, it finally ended when both leaders made a couple of agreements. One, missiles out of Cuba, and U.S. in return would no longer mess with Cuba, basically, definitely not invade them. And the secret third agreement was get rid of the missiles out of Turkey. Now, the thing with the naval blockade, this whole thing, the thing with the naval blockade, like the fact that like it was technically kind of an act of war that almost actually, got things started. This is the closest that we have ever been to a nuclear fallout or nuclear missiles being used that could end the world. And which, I mean, Jesus, the peak is here. Like, we have a whole section after this, but,
But if anything, probably what this is going to show is that it's probably this, maybe it helps both sides realize, hey, guys, look, we don't have to like each other at the same time.
we almost
we almost like just like, well, besides white being like, I was gonna get you, but you're gonna get me, but we're also gonna get everybody else too.
Like that was kind of cool for a second, but let's not do that again.
Yeah.
You know,
Let's
it's-
never do that again. So
Yeah.
you do see a bit of it, do you? Well, we'll say a bit. Maybe we're not gonna get to the point where we're gonna nuke each other, at
Yeah.
least not right away.
Yeah, and then North Korea. Anyway, here's a political cartoon. You got JFK over here. You got Khrushchev over here. They're arm wrestling, and I thought this was pretty cool image. But anyway. So we're moved from that tense confrontation or direct confrontation, and we move into some more indirect stuff. So you know a little bit about the Congo and how that relates to the Cold War. You got to know about the Congo in general. The Congo had had a long history of being exploited. Basically, like all these places, Vietnam, Cuba, the Congo, basically they were exploited and exploited further. The Belgian colony, because Congo was like the only Belgian colony basically, under King Leopold II, had a bunch of brutal labor tactics and genocidal practices being used to harvest rubber. And this is like, I'm gonna place this 1870s. What would rubber be used for? You know, tires, stuff for cars, which are a new thing at this point. And basically, it was genocide, like what he did with people. In fact,
I remember when we studied
Freshman
Africa,
year. Talked about it.
there were like pictures of mutilated children.
Yeah, he didn't just flat out kill them; he mutilated them as well. I believe his death toll was something like 2 million people, something like that, which is pretty crazy. But in the Cold War, the nation's uranium deposits were highly coveted. Why would uranium be coveted in the Cold War? Atomic bombs, yes, because how are you going to make it if you don't have the resources to make it? It's crazy. Anyway, Shinko Lobwe mine. I don't know if that's exactly how you pronounce it. Probably isn't. I apologize. But supplied the scientists of the Manhattan Project. And in 1951, 75%, 3/4 of all the supplied uranium going to the United States, which is almost 3,000 tons, came from the Congo. So very rich region. And the Katanga region, or the Katanga region, was a geopolitical focal point because it was so uranium rich. This allowed America to have close ties to the white minority rule in South Africa because they were the kind of last colonial thing basically, and they were like, oh, these guys might have influence, let's be friends with them. Even though they were
led to apartheid.
Yeah, even though they were super racist and also not cool. But Patrice Lumumba became the Congo's first prime minister when the nation won its independence from Belgium on June 30th, 1960. And he stated in a phrase that will definitely not become very sad and ironic in a second, we are going to see to it that the soil of our country really benefits its children now. What does that mean in reference to what we just talked about resource-wise? Because the soil of our country benefits its children. Essentially, what that is kind of saying is that the resources of this country, people of this country, and everything that has to do with it are going to benefit us. They are going to benefit some foreign people. We are the children of Africa, or this region of Africa at the very least. We should see it fit that we are the people that deal with this, no one else. Unfortunately, it doesn't really happen. But yeah, he was inspired with the non-alignment movement of Nkrumah. And he was the prime minister of Ghana.
Yeah, we read about him too.
Yeah. I don't remember. Oh,
There was a song about him.
yeah, I remember. Okay, I remember things. I'm not stupid. Anyway, these two, met in 1958 at the All Africa People's Conference in the capital of Ghana, Accra. Lumumba's ideal vision. The nation suffered a blow. after Katanga rebels. Remember, Katanga was that uranium-rich region, backed by Belgian paratroopers. Kind of funny. I mean, they gained their independence, but kind of not really, because these guys are like, these are the Belgian guys, the white guys with a lot of guns. And they seceded the Middle Rift region, which kind of made everything difficult. So, civil war and crisis. The UN Secretary, General Dag Hammarskjöld, it's like a German name, reacting to an appeal.
I don't think that's German. That's like Scandinavian.
Yeah, that actually is. That's like Swedish.
Yeah.
Reacting to an appeal. So it should be Skuld, Hammarskjöld, reacting to an appeal from Lumumba, sent a UN peacekeeping force, but he didn't want them to directly do anything with the civil war. They just wanted them to sort of like monitor and try and keep things peaceful.
Yeah, that usually happens with UN peacekeeping forces. They're there, and they only react to things that they see. They don't try to be proactive and stop things. They just try to keep it contained.
Like genocides, Jesus, you win. Anyway, Lumumba then went to Washington to seek extra assistance, but he was denied because the Americans were like, "Oh, this guy is like not alignment. What would be the word? He's coming to us for help." Not anymore. And then he was kind of forced to seek Soviets, who actually did agree to send military aid, and shortly thereafter, Nkrumah sent 2,340 soldiers to join the UN peacekeeping force, and that was nearly 1/3 of the entire force that helped him. So yeah, the CIA, realizing the fact that Soviets are actually helpful to people who ask for it, were like, oh, that's kind of stupid. We're gonna kill this guy because why not? He planned an assassination plot and a coup against Lumumba, and this guy, Joseph Mobutu, is the worst guy ever. Because he was a trusted chief of staff, and he turned on the leader and turned Lumumba over to the Katanga rebels, who subsequently tortured and murdered the man. He is Judas, basically. Oh, this guy right here. Stupid. Anyway, he took control, and the regime continued to get support from the U.S., because of course it did, specifically when a rebellion nearly toppled the dictator in 1964. The U.S. also celebrated the fall of Nkrumah, that was Ghana, government, when he was on a trip to China in 1966. Essentially, U.S. intervenes because Soviet bad typically leads to the most amount of damage happening to the fertile nation. That's all it needs, really.
What slide is this?
Mhm.
What slide is
These are the last two slides.
it?
That'll be good. Of course, this isn't the end of section 3. It's I would say it's 3/5 of the way there. However, I will probably have all this done maybe today because I started on it today, and then I'll probably have it done tomorrow. Anyway, Vietnam and domino theory. As the Viet Cong, which the Viet Minh, you'll remember, is the previous force. They sort of evolved into a true kind of military. They were still guerrilla fighting force. They were the Viet Congs. In North Vietnam, waged war against the South, and Kennedy poured more money. This is when you start to see like the Vietnam War or the Vietnam conflict becomes a war now. Like, I believe it starts under Kennedy, and then this guy right here actually really makes it bad. And then Nixon says he's not going to make it bad, but then he kind of makes it bad, but then he ends it. So it's like, so Kennedy poured more money and resources. American advisors surged from 600 to 16,000 in Kennedy's first, it should be years, because God knows he didn't even get through one term before someone just had to stop it. That should be 2 years. Keep that in mind. 2 years. Domino theory, which I kind of think is stupid because it's like everything is domino theory if you really like think about it. It's such a basic term. But domino theory predicted that if one country fell, say Vietnam, other neighboring countries would also fall to communism. A particular fear was the communist Pathet Lao movement in Laos, which wasn't really that much, not that much traction at this point. But if Vietnam fell, then this would kind of get more traction. Yeah. So in 1963, this is on South Vietnam, this specific section. Anti-Diem, who was Diem?
The leader.
The leader of South Vietnam. He was a anti-communist Catholic, but he was also kind of a big bag. Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry. This is educational purposes. Anyway, protests broke out in South Vietnam. Dramatic displays of Buddhist monks setting themselves on fire, which is what this guy had. Jeez, if only we had protests like these. People in South Vietnam knew how to stage a religious protest. That's for sure. Anyway, they set themselves on fire in protest of the South Vietnamese government, and Washington was like, okay, Eisenhower was funneling money to this guy, Kennedy was for a little bit, and we were like, yeah, buddy, that's not good. Let's not do this anymore. And then, seizing their chance, November 1st, South Vietnamese generals shot and killed Diem, which, whatever. 3 weeks after the South Vietnamese coup, Kennedy was assassinated, which is why that should say years, not terms. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was then ascended to the presidency, and he was to force out Vietnam. And by force it out, it means add more force into that area and don't actually stop it.
And it should be noted because there's some that you'll hear all sorts of conspiracy theories about all of a sudden JFK getting assassinated shortly afterwards, and then B. Johnson all of a sudden becoming president. And how was Vietnam a conspiracy about? Lyndon B. Johnson, because if I'm correct, his wife's family owned a significant portion of the Bell Helicopter Corporation. That's one symbol that's probably synonymous with the Vietnam War is the Huey, is the Bell, the Iroquois, also known as the Huey helicopter.
Yeah, choppers.
It's like, how convenient. Now, to be fair, that's all theory. I have nothing to add.
I mean, there are tons of theories. There's a theory that the CIA did it because Kennedy was talking about civil rights and stuff like that, and there's theories that there were a bunch of shooters who were communists, because I think Lee Harvey Oswald was the man who killed JFK, and he was actually in the Soviet Union. And then once JFK was assassinated, this is all unrelated, so you don't have to take notes about this. But they were like, oh no, people are going to think we did it. And this guy's from, oh no. Yeah. But then they had to check, he wasn't in any major position. He was just like, communism's cool. I'm going to this guy.
There's even conspiracy theories, there's so many unproven ones. There was one that Adolf Hitler was actually a dolphin. Wow. Because Adolphin.
Yeah. A lot of them, I will say, JFK is probably one. It's probably one of the more realistic. Something probably happened here, but I don't know. Definitely, the moon landing's real. We don't talk about that in the social science guide, but the moon landing's real for sure. It's not made out of cheese. Anyway, Johnson, previously known for his operation in the U.S. Senate, he was a Texan Senate member. Accelerated our involvement in Vietnam, and he declared, "I'm not going to be the president who saw Southeast Asia go the way China went," which I guess technically he wasn't. That was Nixon, but God knows he didn't stop it. Anyway, acting on reports that North Vietnamese patrols had fired on a U.S. destroyer in this area, the Gulf of Tonkin, Johnson and Congress in the Gulf of Tonkin, or Tonkin Resolution, voted to repel any armed attack in Vietnam. In 1967, specifically, America dropped a little over 200,000 tons of explosives on North Vietnam, and American troops in Vietnam went to 500,000. That's a lot.
226,000 in the United States. We would drop more bombs in Vietnam than we would drop in all of World War II.
Yeah, that is insane. And a bunch of farmers ended up winning the war against that. So yeah.
So it comes back to if you remember when we were talking about Fidel Castro, the guerrilla tactics, or the French and Vietnam food. So if you go in terms of straight up conflicts, meaning straight up battles, the U.S. generally won most of them, or so. What you got to do is recognize the strategy of North Vietnam saying, hey, we cannot win in a conventional fight,
So if you can't win playing the Americans game, what do?
Yeah.
You don't play the game.
You got to think about the war in Vietnam in a couple ways. One reason that we didn't really win is because domestic support, which is
That's
the next
where we're
slide, but I didn't finish it. So domestic support really started falling. And a lot of that was because television was a thing at this time, and we saw the atrocities of war at home.
Yeah, because well, you got to think all the other films of the United States that American citizens have seen in war. You got to think so. We're thinking World War II. Whereas the media, it's like there was a lot was censored. They would show certain things, but generally they would always show America in an idyllic light. Think of probably the best image we all think of World War II as Marines as they raise the flag over Mount Suribachi or so at Iwo Jima. That's the image we all associate. Oh yeah, we have won. America, the side of freedom has won, and that's what we see. But now all of a sudden, no, it's like now you're seeing war and all its horror. You're seeing, hey, young men getting blasted apart. You're seeing, hey, there's a priest that just set himself on fire. You're seeing villages get burned.
And one thing I would like to mention as well. Note that we won the war with Japan with a nuclear bomb, right? And Korea, MacArthur wanted to use nuclear bombs. We were like, we don't do that because the Soviets had it. And we didn't really win that one. That one was sort of like this war just sort of ends and no one really wins.
Yeah, we just kind of both sides like, you know what, I've had enough. You go to your side, I'll go to my side, we'll leave it at that.
And it's still like that today. And this one, we can't use nuclear bombs. Other people have them, and there's not an easy win for this.
But
So
isn't this one they use Agent Orange?
well,
Which is kind of arguably worse.
it's definitely. It's arguably it is morally worse. As far as like flat out damage to the country, technically not, but to people. We talk about Agent Orange is napalm, other name for it, and we talk about that when we go into protests because people are protesting that. But essentially, because we're at the end of this, we might as well explain things going further ahead. Napalm was a jelly-like substance that essentially was liquid fire that clung to your skin. And we dropped tons, like thousands of tons of napalm on Vietnam. And no, this was the only time we did it because later in history it seemed too unethical to use.
And there's kids now in Vietnam that have mutations and are mutilated because their grandparents had napalm dropped.
It's not because it's radioactive, but it's because the chemicals in it and stuff like that.
It damaged their DNA
Yeah.
on a molecular level.
I think it was Agent Orange and napalm too. But the moral question about using napalm, remember when I was talking about when we were first referring to the end of World War II, how they had this debate whether we should use the atomic bomb, and how one of the guys that was on the chairman of the Department of Defense, not even his name, he was having qualms about us firebombing Japanese cities because in essence that's what we were dropping. It was a very important early precursor to napalm, and basically you're burning people alive with napalm. Like I said, what makes it terrible is it's like a liquid fire that it gets on you, it doesn't get off, it keeps burning.
Yeah. Like you had people, like there's a famous image of this woman who's like naked and she has like burns all over her body. And that's what people did. Because if it got on your clothes, there was still a chance for you not to burn and die because you had to rip the clothes off. Because it wasn't getting off your clothes, you had to get the clothes off of you before the fire like reached your skin.
Because there are historical accounts of people that are trying to treat people with damage, somebody burns from napalm where the flesh is working, like it's melting and falling off of their bodies.
Yeah.
So in the idea. So yeah, it is there. And one of the things, like I said, from a military perspective, well, there is a lot of problems in Vietnam. One, you're fighting an enemy that refuses to fight you on their own turn, on your terms, a set piece battle, which is what the French tried to do at Dien Bien Phu. They wanted to get the North Vietnamese in a set piece battle where they felt they could win. They underestimated the North Vietnamese and they lost. We were trying, and the thing is, it's like if you look at a lot of set piece battles, the one battle in Vietnam where everyone feels that we ultimately lost the war was the Tet Offensive. Because up till then it had been portrayed that we were winning.
But then the Tet Offensive, even though we technically didn't
We
even
actually
win that.
Yeah, the Tet Offensive, from a military perspective, was a disaster for North Vietnam and the Viet Cong.
But it was televised and everyone saw how gruesome the fighting was.
Yeah, and everyone's like, y'all said we were winning. These guys don't look like they're willing to. These guys don't look like they're surrendering. And that's when support for the war really dropped in the war. America lost the war was not on the battlefield. Because it's that hard here. Because yeah, you also got people, you're drafting young kids fresh out of high school. Most have never heard of Vietnam before. Indeed, if the Vietnam War, no offense to Vietnam, the Vietnam War had happened, would any of us have heard of Vietnam? Probably not. Maybe if you're in an
It's
AP,
definitely the most famous thing in American history.
maybe if you're in AP geography, maybe you studied it.
Because when you think about it, like, how many countries in Asia and more specifically Africa do we not know about? Just because we haven't had much involvement.
there's been no conflict.
Like most people know what South Africa is, most people know what Nigeria is, and Egypt,
Yeah.
and then once you start getting past that, it's like, oh.
They're just,
We
they
don't
all
really
kind
know.
of just run together.
Same thing with Asia. People know China, people know Mongolia, I guess you can count Russia, Japan, that kind of stuff. But once you start getting into like Cambodia and Thailand and
These are all
And
countries that we have never heard of.
Mhm.
And the thing is, like I said, from a military standpoint, the United States won every battle. We lost, but and you gotta realize it's also part of the North Vietnamese strategy was they realized, can we break the American people's will of fight? Because you probably have a lot of people, and it's understandable. Why are we going to fight in a country that none of us have heard of halfway across the world?
one final thing on this slide specifically is that we've been talking about like how many resources were pulled into it and the fact that we weren't going to win it for several reasons. People sort of, put Vietnam akin to a sinking quagmire, quicksand basically, that is nearly impossible to escape, and it just keeps consuming and consuming things, resources, money especially, innocent people's lives, that kind of thing, both American and Vietnamese.
I don't think we have an exact count of how many North
It was around-
Vietnamese.
It was around 3 to 4 million
Yeah,
people.
now we say we lost 55,000, that's a great thing, but then all of a sudden you hear their casualty figures at 3 to 4 million, and that's us estimating.
Mhm.
And realize you're not just talking military personnel, you're talking
Civilians.
civilians and women and children. And yeah, and we're the same way. And part of this goes into one of the US's policies of trying to estimate victory as they realize, okay, we're not team objectives, so they had this obsession with body counts.
Mhm.
So it's
Oh,
like if
yeah.
you fire a certain amount of bullets, you should kill X amount of enemies. Which that of course doesn't translate. When you think of it, is kind of a dumb
Yeah.
translation for war.
Especially when you have some bad cookies that make it through, they're like, oh, it doesn't matter if I kill civilians, I can just say that they attacked.
But at the same time, it's like, yeah. And if I'm like, you're talking this one, it's being sick.
That's Vietnam, at least the beginning of it. We'll go into more detail and finish section 3 next time. These videos I feel like are going to be very useful. Because essentially it's what we did towards the end of last year.
And we can go back and
Yeah, definitely.
I'll
I'm
get.
happy that we studied the 1960s before, because I remember a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it gives you a good